Hello, and you're very welcome to another edition of the JMac Podcast. I'm John Mann, and of course, this podcast is sponsored by OrgaRetro.com. Check the website out for all your retro gear needs. And I'm delighted to say I'm being joined by former Dublin footballer Ciarán Whelan today. And man that needs very little introduction. He's won six Leinster titles, 2 All-Stars, and represented the Dubs from 96 to 2009. So, Ciarán, where did it all go wrong from there?
Well, I don't know, John. I should have. Geez, if only I was 10 years younger, I wish I had stayed on for a few more years. I would have got a good roll of the good times. But sure, listen, that is life. That is life. It feels like it's actually hard to believe it's 12 years. You know, the last 12 years have just flown in. But it's been some period for the Dubs, all right. You know what I mean? Some period for the Dubs. Have to start sharing it around soon. You know.
Yeah, geez, absolutely. Geez, it'd be great. It'd be great. And I suppose, how's life, Ciarán? Still COVID times at the minute. We've been at it for the last year and a half, and it's just very tough. But how have you found it all? Obviously, the lack of football. I know we had a bit of a finish to the season last year. It was great, but how have you found it all?
Yeah, it's been. Listen, I think it's been a tough year for everybody. You know. Right throughout, you know what I mean? You know, anybody with kids has had challenges with younger kids, you know, anyone with teenagers, I look after a team here in Dublin-Meath. I've had them since they were kids, and, you know, they're 15, 16 now, and they've lost nearly, you know, they're going to lose the bulk of 2 years of their football career when they're going through key area development. So, you know, being off the pitch for such a long period of time it's been challenging for us all. You know, the inter-county game, you know, yeah, it was great to get a championship last year. It was kind of quick fire stuff, though, wasn't it? It was kind of, and I know you probably think differently because it was brilliant from a Cavan perspective. But you know, it was brilliant to have that. It was great to have the championship, but there was, you know, being lucky enough to be in the position to get to some of the games. There was still a soulness about it without the crowd and without the atmosphere and without that whole summer buzz and what that does for the GAA and the crowds going. So it was a pity, and it's a pity that it's going to happen probably again this year in the similar fashion without crowds and stuff like that. So yeah, it's a challenging period for us all, but listen, our health is our wealth. That's the main thing, and once we all have that, they're only small challenges you just have to overcome. But looking forward to the next few weeks of getting back in the field, coaching with the younger lads, and then hopefully a summer championship if we get into the league and a few league games and get the championship going again, you know. So yeah, listen, something to look forward to.
Yeah, absolutely. Jeez, and long. Hopefully, fingers crossed, it can kick off anytime soon. And I suppose how much kind of has it changed your perspective on things, Ciarán, as well? Because, like I always say in these podcasts, like it's, you know, we're probably not in as much of a rush as we all think we are, and you know, it's probably slow people down, and maybe we can think about other stuff, and it's, you know, when we're in the normal bubble and things are going right, oh geez, we're in such a rat race. But has it changed your perspective on a lot, Ciarán?
Yeah, I suppose it has. In some ways, it's been a slower pace of life, you know, obviously very, very different, or very, very busy, like work-wise. But, you know, I think everybody has enjoyed, you know, I think you're right to a certain degree. We kind of lost the run of ourselves, and we were running around the place, running from one thing to the other. And I think the crack is going to be trying to adapt again to come out of it, you know what I mean? And all of a sudden, you know, have that day of activity on a Saturday where you're running around to kids stuff, or you're running to matches, club matches in the evening, or into county matches on a Sunday, or doing little bits and pieces for RTA and stuff like that. So it's all going to start up, and I think that's going to be the challenge for everybody to readapt nearly to get back into that rhythm. But I think we've also learned a lot in lockdown that, you know, it gave us good time with our families. You certainly appreciate, you know, being around the family home a lot more, even though you do need the break every now and then. And you missed a game of golf, you missed a few pints and stuff like that. But yeah, it's definitely been a slower pace of life. I would be, you know, relatively that I would be happy enough keeping to myself to a certain degree, and you know, it's been a time just to chill out really at the weekend. So I've certainly enjoyed elements of it. But then you do miss that. You just listen, when you have a passion for sport and you love sport, you know, I'm nearly at that point where, you know, I love watching sport on TV. I'd be big into the golf and the rugby and, you know, the soccer to a certain degree. But you're nearly at that point where you're saturated by watching sport on TV, you know what I mean? So I'm fed up being on the couch at this point, so it'll be good to get back out there and see a bit of live sport, and hopefully the GA gets up and running in the next few weeks.
Yeah, and we could worse complaints sitting on the couch drinking beer. In fairness, it's not too
bad. No, exactly. It's not too bad. Like last week watching the Masters, or you know what I mean, or watching Leinster or whatever. It's not too bad. So yeah, and as you said, you probably didn't get a chance to do that a lot when you're running around the place, running from one thing to the other. So yeah, there's been upsides. I think everybody probably, maybe the first lockdown, I think, certainly everybody enjoyed it to an element. It was a slowdown in life, and I thought it gave everybody a time to reset. And I think you certainly do a lot more thinking. You have more time to plan out your future and strategize what you want to do in life, rather than having that hectic space running from one thing to the other. But I do think the last 3 or 4 months have been a lot tougher on people, a lot more frustrating. It's worn off now at this point that people are very, very frustrated. It's sad to see there's a lot of anger out there, which is understandable. But you can see there's anger and frustration out there, and it's probably affecting the moods of a lot of people. And we don't know the mental health crisis behind the walls that is developing in some scenarios. So listen, the sooner life returns to normal or some sort of semi-normality, the better.
Yeah, geez, I agree with all that. And I suppose, like, how important is it to kind of pick up the phone and ring that former teammate, former, like, even your granny, your granddad, your mum, your dad, anyone at all here, and just to kind of keep in touch and, I suppose, let them know how you're feeling and thinking?
Yeah, it's like it's important to stay in touch, and in some ways you've kind of found that you have been able to stay in touch because you have that little bit more time, and you're not running around the place. So I think a lot of people have reconnected in lockdown with people they may not have been in touch regularly with in the normal way of life. So yeah, it is important to look out there, and I think, like, even from a team perspective, a lot of people have done great work on Zoom and brought teams together and try and keep young lads engaged. And, it's important for their mental health, keep that engagement going, all sorts of activities. People have really worked hard to try and not be do different things, I suppose, to keep everybody engaged. And I have to say, like, some of the intercounty players, current intercounty players, what we haven't probably seen and what probably hasn't been endorsed is the amount of time they've given back during this lockdown and being available to, come on Zoom calls and talk to teams and give motivational talk to teams. I think, some of them have been fantastic in that regard. And they're the little things that people don't see. We're great in the media jumping on the negatives and and trying to find ways to criticize teams or managers, but the unseen work that goes on in the background, whether it's kind of coaching Zoom classes or motivational talks, like some of the work by some of the intercounty players during the lockdown has been fantastic, you know what I mean? And they've been probably, in a strange way, more accessible because they have that bit of time on their hands as well. And I think that's where things have transformed to a certain degree. Playing in the intercounty game and being in that bubble, there's huge demands put on them in terms of training, and to get guys to come out and do sessions or to give up time, you're asking them to give up an evening of their life. Now we live in an environment where somebody can come on a Zoom call for an hour and talk to 30 people and give really strong, good life messages, whether it's sporting, whether it's in personal life. We never would have saw that as a tool of communication or a tool of talking to 30 people collectively, 18 months ago. So I think it's great we have that, and there is positives going forward that we've learned a lot in lockdown, and so we have to take all the positives we can out of it.
Yeah, definitely, without a shadow of a doubt. And so we can touch on to the football end of things. You represented the Mighty Dubs from 96 to 2009, as I was saying, and look, great years for you, Ciarán, coming up against some amazing teams. And I suppose fresh-faced young Ciarán Whelan made the breakthrough in 96. Yeah,
a long time ago now, only a nipper and a lot skinnier. But yeah, listen, it was a dream come true for me, and a lot of people, you know, if you ask me would I do it all over again, 100% would I do it all over again. If somebody said, would you do it all over again with the same results? 100% I do it all over again. Would you be able to give it more? You always reflect back on your career and think, could I have got more out of myself? I think that's a natural instinct, and you look back on the harsh days and you think, what if, and stuff like that. But a brilliant journey, you know, in that I never backed myself that. I never probably had the strong enough confidence as a kid to believe that I could go forward and play with Dublin from 96. I got that opportunity. Mickey Whelan gave it to me in an Leinster final in 96. I got it. It was an All-Ireland winning team at the time from 95, and had a brilliant 14 years. And, you know, I do, like, the reason I look back on it so fondly is we were very, very lucky that every day for a period of over 10 years, the large majority, I'd say 95% of the time we played in front of 80,000, you know, 70, 80,000 people, full stadiums, whether it was the first round of the Leinster or a Leinster final or an All-Ireland semi-final or whatever it was, the place was rocking. And there's no better experience. And I think that's what you miss most, that buzz of Croke Park on a big day with the crowd roaring. And listen, there was plenty of ups and downs through my career. You know, probably more downs than there was ups to a certain degree, but loads of fond memories. And I would do it all again in a heartbeat, John, if I could.
Yeah, definitely, without a doubt. And I suppose, as you were kind of referencing there, 95, seriously strong Dublin team, and not like probably just continuation of this year's team and last year's team and recent years. So what was it like to kind of break on to that successful Dublin team, Ciarán, and be part of a really good winning mentality?
It was intimidating, and I never shit myself so much going into that dressing room that night. That team were All-Ireland champions in 95. They were idols of mine growing up. I had been on Hill 16, you know, pissed as a 16, 17-year-old watching those big games and having great days out in Croke Park. And, you know, like John O'Leary had been there since I was 7 years of age. You know, Joe McNally won All-Ireland in 83 when I was 7 years of age. And to be called into that dressing room, I'll never forget it. I shook. I was shaking with nerves. And you got through the first session and you got home and you're delighted with yourself and you thought, Jesus, I have to do it all again on Thursday. I have to go through this again. And so the first few weeks are absolutely nerve-wracking. Absolutely nerve-wracking. And I think I played my first game. It was a challenge game against Down in Parnell Park. And I played left half-back. Was the first number senior jersey that I got. And scored a couple of points that day, and it kind of took off from there. But like anything, it does take you a while to settle in to a team like that. And I was probably lucky in that I made my debut in the Leinster final. That was my first competitive debut, and I wasn't named in the team. I knew I was starting on the Saturday. Now Guyden was injured. And nobody knew who I was. A lot of people thought I was Mickey Whelan's son, and the manager had plummeted his son in from nowhere. Mm-hmm. So I was very well unknown. I played minor, obviously, in '94, but that wouldn't have, you know, not nobody would have really known me. So in some ways, it was an ideal way to start, because back then the team was named on a Tuesday night, and if you were named on a Leinster final team, you would have had 3 or 4 days of scrutiny on the media. Who is he? What is he about? All this sort of stuff, and the pressure would have built. So it was an ideal way to be flung in the deep end in the pissings of rain against a Meath team that was allegedly going through transition, and a game. Listen, we should have my debut. Should have won. I got a goal in the last minute. That was disallowed. Like that's Carlsberg stuff, you know what I mean, on your debut. If we had won by a point, but it wasn't to be. But that was the start, and never looked back from there. I suppose it became part of your life for 14 years.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose what was them early years like to play in, Ciarán? Because obviously the early 90s and early 2000s, probably before all these kind of blankets came in, and you probably got out of there before all this defensive nonsense came in. Yeah. So like, what was it like kind of playing them early years and all out attacking football? I suppose, Ciarán, really.
Yeah, it was all out attacking football. It was, the game has changed and evolved so much now. When you see games, it's about possession, and you see teams dropping off in certain parts of the pitch or holding off to tackle the guy out into a zone and that sort of stuff. So it's all meticulously broke down. Probably the game was played at 100 miles an hour back then, similar to the games. You watch back now, and I think if you look at the speed of the game, well, people would say, yeah, the guys are definitely fitter now, and they're better conditioned and that sort of stuff. And it's kind of like a transition up and down the pitch. The whole team nearly moves. Back then, it was just flat out kind of 15 on 15. But you only had seconds on the ball because the immediate instinct was the closest man was going to tackle you. There was no dropping off into shapes or pushing someone down a line. You only had a second or two on the ball. That was the standard. That was the difference between club and intercounty. So if you didn't utilise your time in possession or get by a guy, you were hit, and you were hit hard. And it was midfield was fairly, I suppose, traditional in that kickouts were all long. So it was about breaking ball. It was about clean possession. And so it was more about a one-on-one battle with your opponent. And I learned a lot in the first few years that, coming up against the likes of John McDermott, even Niall Buckley, Martin Lynch in Kildare, and marking these kind of big midfielders, that one thing I learned from a midfield perspective was you were either bullied or you were the bully. And that was, and I certainly got a good few clips in my early days, and there was probably a lot more off the ball stuff, and it was a learning process. So it was a kind of a psychological thing as a midfielder. You had to lay down a marker, and I remember marking the likes of Seamus O'Hanlon from Louth, who just bait the shite out of you, you know what I mean? And I played on Leinster team with them, but it was a huge learning process. So I was. If I had a turn sideways, you probably wouldn't have seen me. I was so kind of skinny, really, at that point. We certainly, conditioning work wasn't part of the GAA mindset back then. You know what I mean? Even in the 90s, there was very little weights done. It was traditional training on a Tuesday, Thursday. So I was extremely fit and skinny. So it was a huge learning curve. And it probably wasn't, I'd say, I would have said probably wasn't until 1999, or maybe debut 96, 1999, where you really began to feel comfortable that you could get out there and kind of control a game and stuff like that. So, yeah, it was a totally different time, and there was tough times for Dublin as well. When you think about it, that like we went 7 years without winning a Leinster title, which now if you were to say that would happen to a Dublin team, people think you'd lost the plot altogether. You know what I mean? So, Meath were regenerated under Boyle in 96. They won All Ireland 96, 99. Kildare were coming to their fall under Mick O'Dwyer and a good team. They got to the final in 98. Offaly under Tommy Lyons, you know what I mean, were a very tough, hardened team to beat. Used to hate playing against them. So it was a different Leinster football was a different dynamic, like totally different. But it was a huge learning curve. But when you're young, you've no fear. When you're young, you've no fear. You just get out and play. You know what I mean? So, but it wasn't until '99 that I couldn't have really said until 1999, which would have been my fourth year, that I felt really I'm comfortable now, and I can get a grip of this. You know what I mean? You were swimming in the deep end up to that against really good, experienced campaigners who were smart, cute, and knew what to do. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose kind of them early years, we always remark on the big physical teams that Armagh were, Tyrone, Kerry, and
actually you had Cavan in '97, John. You were probably too young to remember.
No, I was maybe a couple of months old, maybe, Ciarán, at that stage.
There was a few nice tough bios up there as well. You know what I mean?
Darren McCabe, Ciarán. Darren McCabe.
Yeah, well, Dermot. Yeah, well, I would have played in America with Dermot. Obviously, you know what I mean. Dermot was a top class footballer. Yeah, he was a top class footballer. But I would have the name's gone from me now. He used to play centre back, Bernard
Ciarán.
Morris, yeah. Like there was times.
Yeah,
there was times in those first couple of years I would have been centre forward or wing forward. You know what I mean? I only really settled into, I was in and out of midfield. But I would have marked him in a couple of times in league games and stuff like that. But Cavan obviously had a brilliant year under Martin McHugh. You know what I mean? That was just a phenomenal time for Cavan, and then came up against Kerry and that sort of stuff. So like there was probably, if you were to compare it to listen, there's great games every year, but there was more teams competing at a more realistic level possibly back then. You know what I mean? You got better games in a straight knockout championship. And why did it change? Because that gap probably just expanded out, you know what I mean? So, and then 2001 we went into the backdoor system, which kind of changed things a lot,
Yeah, definitely. Like that's what I'm kind of saying. Like against them good unreal teams like Kerry, Armagh, Tyrone. Like what was it like to come up against them? Because obviously we know the strength and conditioning Armagh would be putting in from the early noughties, Ciarán, and obviously big fella yourself. So what was it like to come up against the McNulty's and McGeaney and probably good pals of yours, I'd say?
Yeah, well, like the thing about Armagh were knocking on the door for years. They were getting to All-Ireland semi-finals and weren't getting to that final. Do you know what I mean? And they were coming out of Ulster. They were phenomenally big, strong, physical team. And my geez, if you got a belt, you knew you're taking a belt. And we probably met them in 2002 when they were at the peak of their powers, and we were, Tommy Lyons had taken over for us. We had made the breakthrough. We'd come out of Leinster, the likes of Alan Brogan and Barry Cahill. We had regenerated and brought in a few young lads. It was a very, very different team that played in 2001 against Kerry in Thurles. So we were a little bit wet behind the ears to a certain degree. We were not half as seasoned as Armagh, and still were a kick of the ball away from beating them in the All-Ireland semi-final that year. And in a strange way, them beating us probably gave them that belief to go on then and tackle Kerry, I think, in the final. But I always feel that's it's like everything. You look back on the games and I'm brutal now at remembering particular points in games, and some even league games I even forget. Like I've gone, if you go back over records, there's games I can't even remember. But certainly that day against Armagh was one that felt got away from us. I always wonder. I don't know if you remember, Paddy McKeever got a goal in the start of the first half. I got a goal just after him, but he got a goal at the start of the first half, and I was looking at. It was on one of the TG Car or whatever there a couple of years ago. I was away working and I was in a hotel and I stumbled across it, and I hadn't watched the game in years. And in the 2002, it was Joe Sheridan-esque. I'm not too sure where he actually kicked the ball. Do you know what I mean? He got the ball in the line and kind of carried it, just swung a boot at it and dropped it, and it went over the line. And I always, after what happened in 2010, you're kind of going, maybe the same level of scrutiny wasn't there, you know what I mean? But I always wonder, was that a question of goal? Would have had changed the outcome? I'm not so sure, do you know what I mean? But it was like 2002, breaking out of Leinster was a great out year, and it was a great game against Armagh. And Kerry went into that game as strong favourites. So if we had beaten Armagh that day, would we have beaten Kerry? We were probably still a little bit off it in terms of where we were in the journey, and there was probably a little too much hype after winning Leinster. You know what I mean? Like we won 2002 Leinster. I think Armagh had won. Had they won 4 Ulsters in a row or something at that point? Like they were much further down the path than we were.
Yeah, and I suppose Ciarán, Meath, that rivalry over the years, it's probably stemmed out unfortunately in the last couple of years. But when things are going good, yourself, one of the best rivalries that ever came out of the GA circles.
Yeah, and like I think it's sad that to me was when I was growing up, Dublin and Meath was probably the highlight of your sporting year, and being on Hill 16 and that rivalry, and Meath had the great team of the 80s, and Dublin were struggling to beat them. They managed to beat them in 89, and then they had the 4 games in the 90s, and then Dublin got on top of them in the night. It was just an unbelievable rivalry. And when you went into the Dublin dressing room, it was always regularly spoken about. You'd be measured as a player by how you perform against Meath. I had my battles with Meath were starting off in the first 4 or 5 years. We couldn't beat them, and then we got a run on them and we beat them. And then Sean Boylan went, and they had different managers and that sort of stuff. And Dublin have continued to beat them. I think it's sad that it's a rivalry I really miss. And like going in to watch the Leinster final last year, and it was the night of the Bloody Sunday, and it was a very poignant night, done really well. And I say this with genuine, because I'd have a hell of a lot of respect for the Meath lads, because the rivalry has been so good there. I really hoped Meath were going to perform better. I'd watched them in the previous games. They looked like they were better positioned to put up the dubs than they had been for a few years. And unfortunately, the speed of the game just caught them, and the pressure that Dublin put them under was phenomenal, and the game was over after 20 minutes. And I find that hugely disappointing. As much as people can be, not critical of the Dubs, but the Dubs are so far ahead of everybody else. But I genuinely feel that Meath should be at a better level in terms of competing with the Dubs. I do. They've given some Dublin minor teams in recent years a good trimming in minor games and stuff like that, and they've been quite competitive at that level. Their underage structures are reasonably good. So yeah, it's a rivalry. It's a genuine rivalry I miss. It's special, there's something unique about Meath football in a way, is that I'm married to a Westmeath girl. I have relations in Cavan, and I think the Cavan people don't mind the Dubs. I do the Westmeath people, and the only reason I think that is because they hate the Meath people more than they hate. That's my sum up in life. That the Westmeath people detested the Meath people, so do the Cavan people. So if you're a Dub, you get a good run in both those counties.
Well, I love the Dubs. In fairness, you've given my family degrees and jobs and everything. So my brothers and sisters are working up there. So Dubs.
But no, listen, I look like that's the great thing about the rivalry, and it's certainly one of the good things I think when you're a long time out of the game is actually meeting up with players that you had good battles with. I think that's the great part of the GA, that most in time to come, fellas will go and have a pint and have that crack together. Do you know what I mean? So there's always one thing that stuck out to me: Westmeath and Cavan, how the rivalry they have with Meath, I think, is massive as well.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, geez, believe you me. And I suppose how kind of ferocious was some of the battles as well? Because I don't know. I can always remember that 2005 game. You would have played them. We'll touch on that documentary Dublin done back in 05 as well, Ciarán. But Graham Garrity scoring points for fun, Alan Brogan, yourself, Colin Moore, all them lads in the peak of their powers. So ferocious stuff, Ciarán.
Yeah, well, five was different in that. 2004 was horrible. Westmeath bet us in the first round. The Paddy was there at that point. Leisha bet us in 2003, and things where Tommy Lyons was squeezed out as manager. The Westmeath day was a horrible day, and we went through the qualifiers. Kerry beat us in the quarter final, but we had a change of management, and Pillar came in, and I've said this before, that I was very much at a crossroads in terms of what direction I wanted to go. It was the lowest point of my inter-county career, and probably considered I really questioned what I was doing, what it was about. And Paul Clark, who was involved in recent years, and who was in the panel when I started in '96, and I knew him as a good friend of mine. He was brought on board with Pillar as a selector, and he knew I was my head wasn't, I was struggling really, and I started to train with him in the December of 2004, and probably trained with him every day, and got myself in the best condition that I'd ever been in, I'd say. and was stronger, fitter, and he really was a superb one-to-one coach, you know, which was probably needed at the time. And 2005, then it was brilliant to get back and win that Leinster title, because we beat Laois in a very, very close game. I should have been sent off against Meath, you know. I was blessed that day. I swung out at Nigel Crawford stupidly. I'd say I stayed on the pitch because it was the first second of the game, and the referee had a big decision to make. And John Bannon and I always made it my business to, before a match, to go up and have a chat to referee and how are things and all that sort of stuff. As a midfielder, you get that opportunity to soften them up a bit, and you're thinking
50 quid.
You're kind of saying, well, if it comes down to the decision, am I going to give this fella a yellow or a red card? I'll give him a yellow one. So maybe that helped me in that first minute. So I could have got that was first round 2005, and I could have had an early shower after 1 second, and I would have missed the second round, and all that work that I'd done, you know, it could have put a huge dampener on the year. But I was lucky. I got away with it and went on then to have a good game against Meath, and that was a huge psychological lift to beat them. And we got momentum after that, and as I said, got out of Leinster, and then we had the battles with Tyrone again, coming on the back of 2003 with an All-Ireland under their belt, with, you know, the likes of Stephen O'Neill and Owen Mulligan, you know, Sean Kavanagh, Conor Gormley, all these boys in their absolute prime, and like we rattled them that day in the first half, and had them on the ropes, and a game like we should have won. Like there's a few games you look back on and you say, did you deserve to lose it? And possibly say, yeah, we weren't the better team, but that was one I feel that kind of got away from us. We bailed it out and went to a replay. But they were the better team the second day. We left ourselves with too much to do, and they went on and kind of they won the All Ireland then. But listen, it was the start of a great few years under Pillar, because we became a lot more consistent, and we're knocking on the door in All Ireland semi-finals, but didn't get there. But it was definitely the most enjoyable part of my Dublin career. Those from 05 to 08 were good years, I have to say. We had a very good setup, well organised, good team bond, good managers. Game was evolving a small bit. They were good times.
Of course, guys, this podcast is sponsored by OrgaRetro.com. Check the website for all your retro gear needs and wants. And I suppose, like, I watched that Dublin documentary. I think it was back in 2005, The Story of a Season. I think it's a great watch. You've obviously cast an eye on it numerous times, Ciarán, and a special documentary. Got inside the dressing room, looked like good crack. He's won Leinster, party bus, good times, and like it was a brilliant watch.
Yeah, and to be honest, it was when someone comes in to do a documentary, your immediate thing is kind of, we're all paranoid in the GA world, like, you know, everyone's paranoid. Oh, geez, what's this? How is this going to reflect or show us and stuff like that? And it wasn't a player decision to a certain degree, and probably initially there was a little bit of caution, but the guy that done it was a super guy and extremely trustworthy, and within a couple of months, you didn't even realise he was there, and he was given kind of full access. And he works in RTA at the moment, and he jokes about, you know, the footage that he does have, you know, in his attic, you know what I mean? And he took hours and hours of footage, and he was with us till all hours in the morning, you know. Like back then, you talk about, intercounty players talk about the enjoyment factor being gone out of it. And I think regardless back then, like whether it was Dublin, whether it was Kerry winning All Irelands, whether it was Tyrone, you know, after the match definitely was your time to let the hair down, and probably the On Monday club followed on a Monday, and he was with us for all of that, and I'm sure he has he could definitely put together a different type of documentary that probably wouldn't be allowed to be broadcast, but like and it's probably something you'd love to see in time, but it showed that there was a good team ethic there. Like, we worked bloody hard, we trained hard, and went on a good run that year. And as I said, I was lucky along the way, in terms of the Meath match and that sort of stuff. But we great times. Like, even the famous night that we call the Venga Bus night, which was a Monday. And it really brought us together to a certain degree. But we played golf on the Monday, and there was someone there who was driving a school bus at the time, and it was in the car park, and 6 or 7 of us thought it'd be a good idea to go around and pick up 1 or 2 of the lads. And it started off as a bit of crack, and once we got 1 or 2 on the bus and we were having a few beers or whatever, it became an idea, well, let's try get the whole squad on the bus. And we spent the night visiting, literally knocking on the doors of each individual player, and whether they were in bed or out with their girlfriend or wherever they were, they got physically lifted and dragged onto the bus. So there was guys on the bus with their pajamas, there was guys on bus boxer shorts, it was literally as you were. And Cathal Jackson, who owns Caffrey's Jacks, was on the bus with us, and we ended up in Copperface Jacks. And like Pillar talks about it as a night that nearly kind of brought the group together to a certain degree. And that, people will criticize that. People nowadays will take the opposite, say, "Oh, geez, no wonder they won fuck all," or whatever, But that every team would have had that was part of the enjoyment of intercounty football. Yes, it was a massive commitment, but by Jesus, you had to enjoy it. It was part of that Sunday or Monday after a match. You had matches every 3 weeks, and when you benchmark and you look at the professional sports and the Leinster team that matches every week and they'd be regularly seen in town, or soccer lads, and not an eyelid bat. When it's a GA team, it's, sure, Jesus, no wonder. You know what I mean? They had that kind of attitude, whether it's a club team or an inter-county team. So yeah, it was good old crack, good night, good old memories, I suppose, to have. Yeah.
Yeah, geez, without a doubt. And kind of watching that documentary, you're always going to get a close up of the individuals that was involved. And Pillar Caffrey, obviously Ciarán, a Dublin legend, and brought so much success to you. It's like, what kind of a character was Pillar over the years? And I think every time he's giving you a speech, you could just hear a pin drop. Yeah,
he was. Pillar was there with Tommy Lyons, and there was there was a few lads wondering what the transition was going to be like when he came in. And we'd been on a trip to Tenerife the previous year with Tommy Lyons, and we went on a training week, and it was like a concentration camp. We didn't get any leeway around like that, and lads were, pissed off, and because the balance of it was totally wrong, and it was counterproductive and that sort of stuff. And Pillar had been involved with that, and lads, they were not that he had nothing to do with it, but there was just that nervousness around the transition. And when he spoke on the first night up in DCU, and he introduced his team and he brought good people in with him, you got a sense straight away that this was going to be a very, very different setup. So it was probably the biggest shift change for us was more around performance analysis and understanding the principles of the game and what we were trying to achieve in terms of our kickouts, our shot options, our defensive positions, our tackle count, all that sort of stuff. It was around that time when there was a significant shift in the kind of the analysis of the game and how individual performance was analysed. So we certainly done a lot more of that, a lot more depth in that, and looking at future opposition and that sort of stuff and their strengths and weaknesses. And he just struck a good balance. He's just struck a really good balance. And I suppose when you reflect, people will look at the Battle of Omagh and the dust up in Donecarney and a few days where the team probably crossed the line to a certain degree. But, he was trying to instill something to bring that group, just to develop that bond. There was nothing really wrong with what he was doing. Every successful team has to have a nasty streak in them to a certain degree, and I think we've seen that with all the teams. Even the current Dublin team, they know how to win, they know what to do when the time is right, and Tyrone were similar, when they were successful and stuff like that. So yeah, it was just he struck a good balance. He brought a good team around him. He brought it to a new level, and most of all, it was enjoyable. It was enjoyable. It was a really enjoyable period, and very well organised and structured. And that's all you can ask for a manager, is to give it 120% and bring good people around him and create. If you're creating a good, positive environment, and your team is well conditioned and fit, they're the simple things that are so important to the game. And sometimes we can overcomplicate it by too much analysis, but he just struck that balance right at the time, and probably very unlucky to not to get to an All-Ireland final. There's the game in Mayo, 2006, the mill at the Hill, but we were 7 points up with 20 minutes to go. We can only blame ourselves as individuals for losing that game. 2007, Kerry beat us by a point in All-Ireland semi-final. Again, one we had in our grasp, you know what I mean? So we couldn't have asked for anything more. Everything was done to give us that opportunity, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I suppose within that documentary as well, we've seen as up close comparison with a lot of players, but I think Jason Sherlock was dropped for a game, and I think he was just beside himself, just throwing basketballs at a hoop, and I think he was dropped, and it just was the worst news in the world for him. So it just goes to show he puts in so much hard work, and maybe at one or two training sessions, Jason might have been off, and in comes another player to take your place, Jason.
Yeah, well, that's what you want, I suppose, in any good intercounty team, is to have that depth that no one's in their comfort zone, and there was, that was one thing that Pillar was good at, that there was no egos in the dressing room, and it's one thing when people very are quick to throw mud at the prior Dublin team and say, right, before Pat Gilroy's breakthrough, why didn't they win? Because Pat Gilroy had to come in and get rid of, in 2010 he got rid of 5 or 6 people and stuff like that. That's nonsense to a certain degree. There was no, certainly in my time, there was the team. Yes, there was a lot of hype around the team. Except that there was a hell of a lot of hype around the team. And when the team won Leinster's, it went into overdrive, and the fans were driving for that success, and it became hugely hyped. And we had to control that hype. We had to deal with that hype, and maybe we could have dealt with the hype a little bit better. But there was nobody above their station. And that's. It's easy to throw in hindsight and say, the reason Dublin changed is because they changed personnel. Do you know what I mean? Like the guys that Pat would have let go in 2010, the ones that people make reference to were top class, committed intercounty players with a super attitude. So that would be one of the things that would. It's a little bit of both. It's a real loose thing to throw out there. That's a key difference. You know what I mean? There's loads of reasons why the pendulum swung the other way. You know what I mean? Loads of reasons, and it's an easy target. But as Pillar did produce, it was a great group of players who really worked hard for each other and just didn't get the breaks.
Yeah, definitely. I suppose you kind of referenced 2006, the game against Mayo, had the Battle up the Hill, and I suppose it's still famous at this day. And suppose, what was your takings from all that? Ciarán, I think I seen an interview you done, I think it was at Joe Today. I think that probably did give Mayo the upper hand, and I think you famously led the charge down to the hill. So you weren't a happy bunny.
Yeah, no, and one of the things that I used to get fairly hyped before matches, and I'd be fairly wound up, and I remember in the dressing room, if we ever had a crowd delay, and it was put back 15-20 minutes, it used to do my head in. Do you know what I mean? There'd be a soccer match on, and the Doves would be late making it in or something, and we'd get the match is put back for 15 minutes to let the crowd in. The Pillar used to slag me because I used to throw a little bit of a wobbler in the dressing room when that happened, but. that day I distinctly remember the word getting into the dressing room that Mayo had gone down the hill end, and I suppose you're hyped and your adrenaline is going and your emotions are taken over to a certain degree. And I remember Tyrone doing it in 84, I think it was, and I was in the Cusick stand with my father at the time, and I remember Dublin coming out and saying, right, we're going down that end. And I distinctly remember that being there for that match. And then this chaos was for the next 10 minutes, both teams warming up. And that was probably the first thing that came back to me. And I said, right, well, there's a tradition here. Dublin have never gone the other end. They're doing this on purpose. So do we back down? Absolutely not. And then we went out and we were determined we were going to go down there. And did it heighten our emotions? Of course it did. Absolutely did. We were wound up, all that sort of stuff. Again, I could have got sent off. I had a bad late tackle on Ronan McGarity. I could have gone after 15 minutes. I was lucky. But did it upset the flow of our performance? No, because we were still up at half time. We had won all our games comfortably that year. We were 7 points up with 20 minutes to go. So, we were in that match winning situation. So did what happened before the match have any impact on it? No, absolutely not. So we threw that game away because, Mayo got momentum at a crucial period of the game, and we weren't able to turn around, and we just didn't perform. We weren't able to do something to get to swing it back our way in the last 20 minutes. So yeah, it was a good stunt. You look back now, and every time I see that bloody picture, I squirm. You know what I mean? I kind of go, "Oh Jesus Christ! Look at you idiot!" They're walking down the hill like an Egypt. You know what I mean? But yeah, it's funny, I suppose, to look back on now. Like Mickey Moore didn't even know what was happening. You know what I mean? The late John Morrison was with him. Pillar clattered into him. I think their physio got a clip of a ball in the head. There was guys hopping off each other, doing their straight runs and stuff like that. It was lucky it didn't boil over, I suppose. But you know what? Maybe, to Mayo's credit, they'd seen maybe our volatility emotionally and how we might get sucked into stuff, and we'd had the Battle of Omagh, and there was that edge on us that we maybe weren't going to back down, and maybe they knew we were going to come down that end. Do you know what I mean? So it was an interesting ploy on their behalf to try and upset the flow, but we threw that game away in the second half. Simple as that. You know what I mean? And what made it worse was, Mayo didn't turn up in the final. And Kerry absolutely plummeted them, and that again, I suppose, demonstrating that Mayo team wasn't good enough. Do you know what I mean? And we certainly would have probably given Kerry a better game, I think, in the final.
Yeah, definitely. I suppose, what was like that day, like the heat of the battle? Like, I think Ciarán McDonald probably scored two of the best points I've ever seen in a pitch. So, Ciarán, what was the intensity like during the game?
Yeah, the intensity was crazy intensity, but you're in the last 20 minutes, they're taking shots from everywhere, and you're just kind of going, Jesus, that's another one gone over. It's another one gone over. And some of the scores that he scored was, I think Andy Moran came off the bench and he got the second goal. And goals are sucker punches, whatever. You have a 7-point lead, and I look back on it, we had won all our games so comfortably that year. We'd never been pushed into the last 20 minutes. Every game was comfortable, and maybe that didn't help us, that we hadn't been pushed to the pin of our collar. And when you were 7 or like a 5-point lead, I always think a 5-point lead at halftime is dangerous, but 5-6 point lead and you can see the goal, you've opened yourself up, you're under pressure. And Mayo just got the momentum and kicked fantastic scores. And listen, they put on a show in the last 20 minutes, and they'd feel they deserved to beat us, but it was a gut wrenching one to take, I have to say, because as I said, some games you deserve to lose, and others you look back and you say, well, we threw that away.
Yeah, definitely. And you had 3 more years with the Dublin senior footballers after that, Ciarán, and I suppose he's got there nearly, and I suppose he's won all the Leinster titles. And I suppose when you the latter end of your career, I suppose you're probably disappointed not to maybe tag on in All Ireland, because obviously I know in 08 he's came up against a very good Tyrone team, and 09 against Kerry, but he's nearly got there. And I suppose obviously in 2010 it all changed, but when you look back in All Ireland, you would have loved to win one, I suppose.
100, absolutely, yeah. Does it define me? No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. And I would have very much a piece of myself. And now, it's the one thing that people say to you all the time, but absolutely not. It's would I love to be there in 2011? 100%. It was bittersweet for me. It was just. But I suppose in 2009, I had one child. In 2005, and I managed to commit and continue to play for 3-4 years, and that's tough going, as I'm sure you know yourself. Anybody with a young baby now, the whole lot, it's a different world for you. But my second child was born the Thursday before the Kerry match in 2009, and I had played the league all year. I picked up a little bit of a hamstring injury coming into championship, and I very seldom had hamstring injury. I was lucky in that regard. I was on the bench. I was struggling to get confidence in training. I certainly wasn't an arrogant or confident type player. I really needed to work hard to get to build on my confidence. I knocked myself too easily. So I was struggling in training. I wasn't getting where I would like to be. Lads were getting a yard. I'd lost a yard of pace, and I came on the Leinster final half time. We beat Kildare, and Pat Gilroy was utilising me in training at full forward, and he had a plan in his head that this was going to be the next phase of my career, and I never really backed myself. As a full forward, I'd spent all my career coming onto the ball, and it was very, very different. Now, it was going well in training, but I don't know whether I had the confidence that it was going to reflect well when I got onto the pitch. But I also wasn't training in midfield then, so I was a little bit off. I wasn't as sharp as where I'd like to be. So I had kind of made up my mind. I was clear that with second child arriving, I was gone. I didn't have the appetite to do a year as an impact sub maybe, and then with 2 children in the house, it's going to be a challenge. So the Kerry game kind of made up my mind. In that, I think I came on and we're 10 points down, and I came on in the middle of the park. I hadn't been playing in the middle of the park, so the main plan of full forward went out the window fairly quickly. Never got to even try it. And I was very, very clear that day when I was finishing up that I was done. Now, would I have gone back? Like, I met Pat Gilroy at the start of 2011. Unfortunately, in 2010, I ruptured my hamstring playing my second league game with the club in February. If I hadn't have retired in 2009, I probably would have been back training with Dublin, and I probably would have been in a better physical condition, and I probably wouldn't have pulled a hamstring. And I did miss it in 2010, and I met with Pat Gilroy at the start of 2011 with a view to coming back and being on the bench, and my hamstring injury was never recovered. I had a significant tear off the bone, and I failed. I broke down a couple of times, so that was the end of that. So it was a project that, so I even gave, I suppose I teased myself a little bit that I gave myself in 2011, I gave myself a little bit of hope that I might walk back through that door again, because I was missing it. 2010 Dublin got to an All-Ireland semi-final, and I certainly was missing it. It was really, really tough to adjust. But then my mind was made up for me in 2011. And I think it's something that I've heard a lot of county players, since they've retired in the last 10 years, people really don't understand how difficult it is to go from that bubble to outside that bubble. It's a very, very tough transition. It's very, very tough transition mentally on players. Now, yes, Dublin went on to be successful, so that was, I had to deal with that. But it's the same for everybody. No matter win, lose, you're part of something for so long, and then you step outside it. It's a huge adjustment, and I don't think there's enough attention given to players as they retire. And like, there's been brilliant books done on it, you know, about the retirement across various sports, because I don't think it just applies to GA, it applies to all sports. When people have been involved at a high level, you know, professional like level for so long, the void that it leaves in your mindset when you step out of it is massive. So yeah, it could have been different, John. It could have been a lot different, but you make peace with it then, and you move on. And as I said, you certainly don't let it define you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose what's the verdict in all this Dublin dominance at the minute, Ciarán? Like, are you enjoying it? Are you kind of waiting for some team to kind of come up and try and contest it? Like, I know Mayo and Kerry have been close in the last couple of years, Ciarán, and obviously you get to see it up close and personal week in, week out. So what do you make of it all, Ciarán, I suppose? And are we looking at seven in a row?
I've a funny feeling this year could be different for some reason. I don't know. I think they could. You know, someone could have an off day this year. I don't know. I just have that instinct that the run is going to come to an end. I don't know why. There's no logic, reasoning behind it. They're probably still as good as everybody. It's been a hugely enjoyable decade, and I spoke back. You know, those when you come to peace with yourself, and you become a supporter again. And I've been lucky that I've got to work in RTE, so you're analysing, you're up close. But it's been a hugely successful period for them. I'd love to see a couple of teams come and really challenge Dublin. You know, last year's championship, probably a little bit of false economy to a certain degree. You know, because it was one chance wonder. You know, Tyrone went early doors to Donegal. Donegal were blindsided by Cavan. Cavan had probably overachieved by the time they got to Croke Park to play the Dubs at a different level, and Dublin coasted through Leinster into a final. Mayo, you know, I don't think James Horan expected to be in an All-Ireland final last year. If I'm being honest, I think he was looking at transition and developing a few players, and I think they were on a journey and a path, and they probably got into bonus territory, and they found a few players, and to their eternal credit, they got to Croke Park and put it up to Dublin again for a period of time, but just couldn't sustain the level for 70 minutes, and that was the worry coming into it. So Kerry last year, I watched Kerry in the league against Monaghan, Donegal, before they went, this was after lockdown, and the way they were setting up and the way they were playing, you were looking, you're saying, they were so conscious of their defence, they were so conscious of having that defensive structure and filling the space defensively and dropping off the full forward line, dropping out to midfield, and then working on their counter-attack play and trying to get players forward or slowing it down. And it was evidence in the Monaghan game that they had changed the way they're playing. And then you come out and you play Cork in a monsoon. Now, a monsoon, when you think about it, and like when you go back to monsoon conditions in the winter, a lot of the technical, tactical structures go out the window. It becomes back to raw. Who wants to win more? Who's going to win that dirty ball? The break, you know, having fellas in offensive positions. And Kerry came out and tried to play the way they've been playing, and they got caught, and deservedly so. It was a really poor performance. So, as I said, there's no logical reason why Dublin should be beaten. I don't know whether Mayo are there yet. Can Kerry turn it around under Peter Keane? Are they a happy camp? That's questionable. Tyrone under Dooher and Logan are going to be probably a different animal. It's going to be very interesting to see how they set up. Galway kind of got caught in their own, like, in fairness to Pádraig Joyce, he wants to play front foot attacking football and play with a high press, and they've some fantastic footballers, but they got badly exposed, I think, by Mayo in the league. And I think the realisation kicked in that he didn't have the defence to go man to man. And I think Galway got caught in a kind of an air of confusion going into the championship at such a short period. So it'll be interesting to see where they develop. Donegal, you know, I think Donegal have been one of the teams that I would have thought were progressing with a great setup, some fantastic players, big, physical. They have depth, but they're not closing it out, and that now they're coming under that pressure of similar to where we were in getting, winning Leinster titles, but getting caught then. So there's something mentally. They just have a mental tweak they have to get right. I'm sure you boys will be back to go one step further. So yeah, I really hope, John, that some come out of the pack and step up to put it up to Dublin, because I said it on Leinster final night. It can be boring, it can be boring, and that's no disrespect. The Dublin team are a wonderful group of players, and what they've done for the county is unbelievable. But when they're whopping teams by 19, 20 points, in Leinster games, it becomes a little bit monotonous. So you're just hoping that there's 2 or 3 coming out of the pack to get that level to give us good entertainment, over the next couple of years. So of course they can win a 7th. There's just a niggling feeling, as I said, for no reason, that I think for some reason they could just get caught.
Yeah, and what's impressing you most about this Dublin juggernaut here? And obviously you're hearing stuff on the ground, and like your own club man Brian Fenton, I'm still trying to see, can we get DNA results and if he's human or not. So what's impressing you most about them, Ciarán?
He's getting better. That's what's like. He's. I think. Listen, they've a super culture in the group, and they lead themselves, and I think that's an incredible place and a very, very difficult place to get to, and you get that through success. It's very hard to build that, but now Dublin have that, and they have such standards, and they've set standards so high for each other. And those standards are now driven by the likes of Fenton and Kilkenny, the Howards, the guys that have been there for, obviously James McCarthy, and some of them are there longer. But if you walk into that dressing room, you're expected to get to that standard, and you're expected to adhere to that culture. And they don't accept, obviously led by Cluxon, they don't accept any glitches or anybody taking their foot off the pedal. And it's so hard to create that environment. But once you have that environment, it's easier to keep it. And it's very hard for other teams, because if you're not getting success, you're always going to have a couple that go against the grain. And all it takes, it's contagious. All it takes is for 1 or 2 to break that chain, and the whole thing can come crumbling down. So I think that's their strength as a group. But getting back to Fenton, I've known Brian since he was 7-8 years of age. He was always a really talented footballer. He was always one of the stronger footballers. But sometimes I wonder. But he's such a brilliant ambassador, and he's such a brilliant guy outside of football. And I look at what he's done for Raheny, and even when I was there, if I was able to do half of what he has done, he has this incredible knack. I heard him speaking after he won the Player of the Year. And he doesn't. He's very much able to park the pressures of intercounty football. He's able to leave them aside and go into that space when required. I know when I was in there, I couldn't do that. I kind of was a 24/7 man, and you were kind of engrossed by the whole thing, and it probably affected your form and affected your personality to a certain degree. He's very much able to, and he spoke about being able to park it and leave it over there. And I think that's a huge strength for him. And I think that's why he's so consistent, because he's able to invest all his positive energy into the actual game itself, and he's able to get away from it. But listen, when he started off, he done everything. He done the simple things right from the start. He never overcomplicated, and he grew into the team. So he never made mistakes, and he became more confident, and he grew. Talk about a late developer. When I had him training Raheny, I was looking down on him. Now I look up to him, and he was 19, 20 at that point. He shot up. So he's a big, powerful, strong man. He's got stronger. He's 26, 27 years of age. He's worked on his fielding incredibly. When he was 21, 22, he wasn't actually that strong fielder of the ball. Now he makes it looks easy. He's a brilliant engine. He's 2 feet. His accuracy is probably 95% when he takes a shot. It's very. If it goes wide, you're nearly shocked. If he hits a wide, you're kind of going, "Jesus, I've seen that before." Incredible stuff. So he's on a track to be possibly the best player that ever played the game. And the thing is, he has the headspace for it, and he has the mentality for it, and he has the personality for it. So he has everything, and he's so important to Dublin. That's the thing, and it's like, people say, well, where will the weaknesses come in Dublin? Well, yeah, like if Cluxton goes, he's a huge part of the jigsaw. James McCarthy goes, he's a huge part of the Fenton, Kilkenny. Every team always has 4 or 5 really, really important players that are key. And people say, they'll just replace them with someone else. They'll have somebody coming through. One thing I will say to you is Dublin don't have another Conor Callan in the pipeline, or another Brian Fenton, or another Ciarán Kilkenny. I know that. That's not coming for another few years. So, because you'd know about these players and you'd hear about them at under 15, 16 minor.
Yeah.
So there isn't a huge flow of players coming through. So it's going to be, the next few years are going to be interesting, because listen, if Dublin go on in 10 in a row, John, it's of no benefit to anybody. That's the reality of it. You know what I mean? Because people will get worn out. There'll be more criticism. There'll be more exaggeration again around various aspects as to why they're winning, that sort of stuff. So I think the next few years are going to be interesting, because, as I said, there isn't a huge depth of talent coming in the next few years. I can certainly say that. So we'll see where it goes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose you're doing the second best thing to play in. You're a pundit with the RTE and the Sunday Game the last couple of years, Ciarán. And I suppose how you found that dynamic and working with the great Pat Spillane and Joe Brolly.
Yeah, been fun, all right. Yeah, listen, I enjoy it. It's great to be still part of the game. It's, to be able to get to games, particularly last year, and to be involved in them is fantastic. I'm doing it since 2010 now, so 10, 11 years doing it. Joe has obviously moved on. It was kind of intriguing to work with him, and I was sitting there beside him that last day with it in the Dublin Kerry All Ireland final, when I made a mistake myself, bad judgment call myself. Everyone makes mistakes, and that's it's been great fun and great buzz to work with. Like, Pat Spillane is a legend of the game. What he achieved, and people probably don't see it. It's gone back so long, but he was an unbelievable footballer. And I have to say, it's been good to work with Paddy. Some man to talk, all right. I give him that. And so was Joe. So like it was like an apprenticeship to a certain degree, John. You know what I mean? Going on live with these guys and not knowing what they're going to say and stuff like that. But listen, I approach it in a very much a way where you have to be balanced. I think you have to respect the amateur ethos of the players. I think that's hugely important. You have to understand that you were there yourself at times. Everybody kind of makes mistakes in life. That's the way it goes. And there's going to be good performances and bad performances. And listen, you call it as you see it. But more often, what you're trying to achieve is trying to look at an aspect of the game that maybe the viewer can't see at home, and give them a different kind of angle on it. The Sunday night show is obviously a lot different. It's very, very intense show in that you could be in RTE from 10 o'clock in the morning till 12 o'clock at night, and over a given weekend you could watch 5-6 games, and in addition to that, there could be 9-10 games on, so you don't get to see every game, and that people have to understand that as well. But it certainly, a lot of work goes in the background to try and see as many games as possible, to give people a kind of a view on a Sunday night. But listen, it's a legendary show. It's good to be part of it, and look forward to getting back there this year again.
Absolutely. I suppose, what did you make of that transition from going to playing to commentating and watching games and just going to Croke Park, sitting down and analysing, Ciarán? I suppose it is a big change, but it's not bad to be part of it.
No, absolutely not. Yeah, it's I suppose the biggest thing for me was that I finished in 2009, and the first year I worked on the Sunday game. Well, I'd done a bit in 2010, but I was there full time in 2011, and the game changed. Jimmy McGuinness arrived on the scene, and the short kick out had been introduced by Stephen Cluxton. Really, like Stephen Cluxton only started bringing that into the equation in 09, really, when that was the first time we started doing it in training, but it became more prevalent in 10. So you had a combination of the possession of the short kick out with the Jim McGuinness approach of the 15 behind the ball, and we had the famous Dublin-Donegal match, and Donegal squeezed the life out of everybody. And then a lot of other teams started to follow that path in terms of the blanket defence, and dropping into pockets and defending in the triangles and working on the counter-attack, and it suited some teams, it didn't suit others. So the game really evolved over the last 10 years. We've now come out of that to a certain degree. Every team plays with a defensive structure, but we're very much like, if you were to, I suppose, compare it to soccer, in that now everybody tries to move forward and kind of attacks, and they try and move back and defend, and they try and slow down the play and have different kind of dynamics to it depending on whether they hold players up front. But generally, the positioning of players has gone out the window. Like, there's no such thing as a 10 or a 12 now, or a 13 or a 14. It's one or two inside, or one up top and one on the 40, and everybody else has a role. So the game has changed so much over the last 10 years. Changed since, as I said, since I retired. So it's been interesting, analysing that and over and looking for those distinct changes to see how teams are changing. And I think it is moving on, as I said, another level now. I've always had the view, and I'd have the same view in terms of rugby, that and people mightn't agree with me, but that's fine. But I do think 13 aside at intercounty football would re-energise the game in bringing the core skills back into it, creating more space, cutting down less options for. Now, we'd still end up with similar structures, but I think it would give more space and be more beneficial to a creative player or a skillful player. And I think we'd benefit from it, because I think the conditioning levels have got so good that, with 15 men on the pitch now, and the way teams can transition defensively and offensively, possession has become the priority. So in some ways it kind of can slow down the game, and some games hit flat patches and become a little bit mundane. So I do think it's something that, the real changes this year are welcome, and that they had to still look at that cynical element in the game, and punishing that cynical element. But I've said it for a few years that I think 13 aside would be a way of kind of re-energising it and creating more space on the field and bring different ideas into the game. You know what I mean? So we'll see how it goes.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think it was Kevin McGurty from Antrim. I was airing the same opinions there a few weeks ago on the podcast. So,
was he right?
Yeah, 13 aside. So with I think if more voices for it, I suppose, Ciarán, and God knows what could happen. And I suppose, Ciarán, when you look back on it all, and you would have played against a lot of top class players over the years, but who would have been the best you played with against over the years?
Definitely, I've said this, with and against, is definitely Anthony Tohill. Was lucky enough to play in Australia with him, and then would have played against him. I have to say, in terms of when we were preparing for that Australian trip in 2001, and we were training quite regularly, to be marking him in training was just unbelievable, because it was massive for my development, because he was your Brian Fenton-esque midfielder at that time. He was box to box, 2 great feet, brilliant fielder of the ball, physical, strong. So having that experience of being able to mark him in preparation for international rules was unbelievable. So he would definitely be the best, and closely followed by Darragh O'Shea. Darragh O'Shea was a top class midfielder as well, in terms of his fielding ability, his ability to get scores. He was brilliant at dropping off and picking up possession, and the Kerry lads always gave him the ball. The difference between Darragh O'Shea was when you're playing midfield, it's traditional midfield that you're battling in for that ball off kickouts. But Darragh O'Shea got on the ball a lot more in open play because he always dropped off and the defenders always looked for him coming out, and then he had great vision to pick out a pass and carry brilliant kick passes of the ball, and he was extremely difficult to mark because of that. He just had it that because they knew he was going to be in that position and give him the ball, it was difficult. So yeah, I'd say Tohill, Darragh O'Shea, and then John McDermott was a good learning curve as well, because he would have, first couple of years involved, he would have bet the shit out of me, so I would have learned a bit from him as well, you know what I mean? So yeah, there were three great midfielders, you know what I mean? So,
and who would be the best player you played with, do you think, over the years?
Dublin-wise?
Anyone at all, yeah, whatever, yeah.
Yeah, good question, I suppose. Paul Curran was probably, Paul Curran, you know, when I went into the squad in 96, Paul Curran was player of the year in 95, he was wing back. He was just electric, and again, he had periods where he played in the forwards. He just had great feet, but he was your typical wing back, like himself and Geraghty as well. In fairness, Graham Geraghty was a top class ball player. Would have played with Leinster with him a good bit as well as the international rules. To me, they were two. Geraghty was playing right half back for Meath. Curran was right half back for Dublin. Two attacking wing backs, kind of like. Listen, Jack McCaffrey is another different gravy as well, but a similar type of player in terms of what they brought to the equation. Yeah, probably Paul Curran, I'd say. Yeah, absolutely. And
absolutely, the last question. Them in famous soccer gloves. What was the thinking behind them? All them years ago, Ciarán.
Oh, jeez, I still get slagged about them. I was out the shed there recently, and I came across a brand new pair in a pack. I said I must send them to somebody. Surely somebody can make good use of them. Yeah, it was something that just worked for me, John. Just worked for me. I always kind of wore gloves, and I had different gloves over the year, and then I was contracted, I suppose, to Puma at the time, and then Puma gloves, and maybe their gloves were just a little bit more bulkier than the normal ones, but whether it was a dry ball or a wet ball, I just liked it because it worked for me and it stuck. And the funny thing about it is, if you go back to that period, there was a good few midfielders that were actually wearing them. For some reason, I just got tagged with the big white gloves, you know what I mean? But yeah, it worked for me. And I was very, not superstitious, but if something worked for me, I would get kind of ingrained by it, and I'd say, yeah, I'm going to stick to that. And it didn't matter what people said about it. I was going to wear those gloves, and then it becomes a habit. You know what I mean? It's like everything, you're wearing them so long, and then the day you don't wear them, you feel, you know, you drop a ball and you feel paranoid or something like that. But yeah, I've a spanking new pair out there that haven't been worn, so a bit of dust on them, but they're still knocking around all right, you know.
That's brilliant. Well, I doubt anyone was going to put you against that superstition, Ciarán, because I own Ciarán Whelan. But Ciarán Whelan, thanks a million for joining me on the JMac Podcast this week. And of course, this podcast is sponsored by OrgaRetro.com. Check the website out for all your retro gear needs and wants. Ciarán, that was an absolute pleasure. You're a hero of mine, and you're a top man. Look after yourself. Thank you.
No bother, and listen, best of luck. We'll be in touch. No bother. All right.
Take
it easy. Look after yourself. Thanks, John. Cheers.
Thank you.